I was 69 when I realized the house had become too quiet. Not peaceful quiet, not relaxing quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you hear every clock ticking in every room. The kind that sits beside you at dinner. The kind that follows you into bed. For 42 years, my life had always been full of movement. Children running down hallways, homework spread across the kitchen table, football games on television, burnt grilled cheese sandwiches, lost car keys, late night laundry, noise, constant noise, and then suddenly, nothing. My name is Linda Harper. I spent most of my life being somebody's mother before I remembered I was also somebody's wife. That realization came far too late. Our youngest daughter, Emily, moved to Colorado in the spring. She hugged me tightly at the airport and promised to call every weekend. She meant it when she said it. Life just became busy for her. I understand that now. Back then, though, I cried the entire drive home while my husband Robert stared silently out the passenger window. When we pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same, but it did not feel the same. Emily's bedroom door stayed half open upstairs. Her coffee mug was still beside the sink. A sweater she forgot hung over the dining room chair for almost 2 weeks because I could not bring myself to move it. Robert walked into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and asked quietly, "What do you want for dinner?" That was it. No conversation about how strange the house felt. No sadness, no emotion, just dinner. I remember looking at him and thinking, when did we stop talking about important things? We had been married 45 years. 45. And somehow, we had become two people carefully walking around each other like strangers sharing a waiting room. The first few weeks after Emily left felt awkward in ways I never expected. We suddenly had too much time together. People never warn you about that. And the children are growing up. Your marriage hides behind schedules, school pickups, grocery lists, mortgage payments, soccer practice, doctor appointments. You stay busy enough to avoid noticing what is slowly disappearing between you. Then one day the children leave, and all that distraction leaves with them. Robert was a retired truck mechanic, strong hands, quiet man, never cruel, never loud, but emotionally distant in ways that slowly wore me down over decades. At first, when we were young, I told myself that was simply how men were. My father barely spoke either. Back then, silence inside marriage felt normal. Now I wonder how many women quietly accepted loneliness because nobody taught us we deserved emotional closeness too. Maybe you understand this feeling. Maybe your marriage changed slowly too. Not through fighting, not through betrayal, just silence. One evening, about a month after Emily moved away, I made meatloaf for dinner. Robert sat across from me at the table, while the television murmured softly in the living room. We ate almost the entire meal without speaking. Finally, I asked, "Do you miss them?" He looked confused. "The kids." He nodded once. "Sure." Then he kept eating. I remember staring down at my plate, wondering why that answer hurt so much. I did not need poetry. I did not need dramatic emotion. I just wanted something real, something human. Instead, dinner felt like sitting beside a man waiting for a bus. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above our bed. Robert fell asleep within minutes, like he always did. I listened to his breathing and suddenly realized something painful. I no longer knew who my husband was when he was not working or parenting, and maybe he no longer knew me either. The next morning, I stood at the kitchen window holding coffee while rain slid slowly down the glass. Robert walked in wearing his old gray sweatshirt. "What are your plans today?" he asked. Plans. I almost laughed. For 40 years, my plans belonged to everyone else. Now suddenly, I was expected to have my own life again? I did not know how. "I'm not sure," I answered quietly. He nodded and walked toward the garage. That was another thing. He spent more and more time in the garage after the kids moved out. Sometimes 4 or 5 hours at a time. Cleaning tools that were already clean. Rearranging boxes. Fixing things that were not broken. At first, I thought he simply enjoyed staying busy. Later, I realized he was hiding from the same emptiness I was feeling. Men just hide differently. One afternoon, I found myself opening old photo albums in the hallway closet. There we were at 32 years old, holding our son Michael at Disney World. There we were at Christmas in matching sweaters Emily picked out. There we were standing beside our first tiny house, smiling like life was simple. I touched one photograph for a long time. Robert had his arm around my waist. We looked happy, not pretending, actually happy. I started crying before I even understood why. Not because I missed being young, I missed feeling connected. That is what nobody warns you about after the children leave. You suddenly have space to notice every emotional crack in your marriage. And once you see them, you cannot unsee them. That evening, Robert came inside carrying the smell of motor oil and cold air from the garage. "You okay?" he asked when he saw my red eyes. I almost said yes automatically. Women my age spent decades saying yes when the answer was no. But something inside me felt tired of pretending. "They honestly don't know anymore," I whispered. He looked startled. For a moment, I thought maybe we would finally have a real conversation. Instead, he slowly sat down at the kitchen table and rubbed his hands together awkwardly. "What's wrong?" The question sounded genuine, but also frightened, like he was afraid of the answer. I sat across from him and tried to explain something I barely understood myself. "I feel like I don't know who we are anymore." He stared down at the table. "We're fine, Linda." Fine. That word again. So many marriages survive on that word, while quietly starving underneath it. Fine. Not close, not warm, not alive, just functioning. I remember looking at Robert's tired face and realizing he truly believed our marriage was normal, because neither of us had ever learned how to talk about emotional loneliness, especially not people from our generation. We survived things. We endured things. We stayed. But nobody taught us how to stay emotionally connected through the years. That night, for the first time in our marriage, I slept in the guest room. Not because we fought, because I needed space to hear my own thoughts. And as I lay there staring into darkness, one terrifying question kept repeating inside my head. What if the children were the only thing holding our marriage together all these years? The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. For years, I had been the first person awake in the house, making lunches, starting coffee, waking children for school while Robert showered for work. Old habits stay inside your body even after life changes. I sat quietly on the edge of the guest bed listening to the silence around me. No footsteps upstairs, no bathroom doors opening, no sleepy teenage voices asking where their shoes were, just silence. At 69, silence feels heavier somehow. I wrapped my sweater tighter around myself and walked into the kitchen. Robert was already there. That surprised me. He sat at the table holding a coffee mug with both hands. He looked older in the early morning light, not weak, just tired. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he asked softly, "Did you sleep okay?" I nodded, not because it was true, because I did not know how else to answer. He stared into his coffee before speaking again. "You didn't have to sleep in there." I leaned against the counter. I needed space. That sentence seemed to land heavily between us. Robert nodded slowly, but I could tell he did not fully understand what kind of space I meant. Physical space was easy for him to understand. Emotional space was different. That morning, he left for the garage earlier than usual. I watched from the kitchen window as he disappeared behind the side door, carrying his old toolbox. It hit me suddenly. My husband had spent his entire life fixing things with his hands. Engines, brakes, broken lawnmowers, cabinets, leaking sinks. But emotions? He had absolutely no idea what to do with emotions. And honestly, neither did I. That afternoon, Emily called. Her voice sounded cheerful and rushed. "Mom, you would love it here," she said. "The mountains are beautiful." I smiled while folding towels. "That sounds nice, sweetheart." She talked about her new apartment, her coworkers, a coffee shop she found downtown. Then her voice softened. "How's Dad doing?" I looked toward the garage window. "He's okay. And you?" That question nearly broke me. Children somehow hear sadness more clearly than husbands sometimes do. "I'm adjusting," I said carefully. There was a pause on the line. Then Emily quietly asked, "You and Dad okay?" I almost lied. I almost gave the same answer women give every day. "We're fine." But something stopped me. "I don't know," I whispered. The silence on the phone became very still. Finally, Emily sighed softly. "I used to worry about you sometimes." I stopped folding towels. "What do you mean?" Another pause. Then she said something that stayed with me for months afterward. "You and Dad stopped laughing together a long time ago. I felt tears fill my eyes immediately. Children notice everything, even when we think they are not paying attention, especially daughters. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. "We tried our best," I said quietly. "I know you did," Emily answered quickly. "Dad loves you. He's just emotionally closed off." Emotionally closed off. Hearing my own daughter say those words out loud made something painfully real inside me, because she was right. Robert loved through responsibility, paying bills, fixing cars, showing up every day. But emotional warmth, conversation, affection, those things slowly disappeared from our marriage years ago. Maybe little by little, maybe so slowly we barely noticed. After the call ended, I sat alone at the kitchen table for nearly an hour. I kept thinking about Emily saying we stopped laughing together. When had that happened? I honestly could not remember. That frightened me. Marriage changes in quiet ways, not dramatic ways. One day you simply realize your conversations are only about groceries, appointments, and weather. You become co-workers managing a household instead of two people sharing a life. That evening, Robert came inside carrying a small cardboard box. "What's that?" I asked. "Found some old things in the garage." He placed the box on the kitchen table. Inside were old family videotapes, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, school graduations. I smiled faintly while picking one up. Oh my goodness. Robert sat down beside me. For once, neither of us rushed to fill the silence. I looked over at him carefully. "You want to watch one?" He shrugged slightly. "Sure." We spent the evening watching old recordings in the living room. The younger versions of ourselves filled the television screen. Michael running through sprinklers, Emily singing off-key Christmas songs, Robert laughing while trying to assemble bicycles on Christmas Eve. Laughing. I stared at the screen when I heard it. I had forgotten the sound of his laughter. Not polite chuckling, real laughter, warm laughter. For a moment, I felt grief so strong it physically hurt my chest. Because somewhere over the years, that version of us disappeared. Halfway through one video, I quietly asked, "Were we happier back then?" Robert kept staring at the television. "I think we were busier." That answer sat heavily inside me. Busy, again. Busy had protected us from seeing the distance growing between us. The children had filled every empty emotional space in our marriage. Now those spaces were exposed. The house suddenly felt too large for two emotionally disconnected people. That night, Robert surprised me. As we stood in the kitchen turning off lights, he quietly said, "I know I'm not good at talking." I froze. In 45 years, my husband had almost never admitted emotional weakness out loud. I turned slowly toward him. He looked uncomfortable already, like he regretted speaking. He paused. "I don't always know what you need from me." For a moment, I saw something vulnerable in him. Not coldness, fear. Older men from Robert's generation were taught many things. Work hard, provide, stay strong, do not complain. But nobody taught them emotional language. Nobody taught them how to sit with feelings. I walked closer, slowly. "I don't need perfect words," I whispered. "I just need to feel like we still see each other." His eyes lowered toward the floor. That hurt me more than anger would have, because I could tell he truly did not know how. And maybe after decades of emotional distance, I no longer knew how either. Later that night, I returned to our bedroom for the first time in days. We lay side by side quietly in darkness, not touching, but not emotionally running away either. Progress at our age looks different. Sometimes it is simply staying in the same room. Around midnight, Robert suddenly spoke into the darkness. "You know something?" "What?" "I hated when the kids left too." My throat tightened instantly, because that was the first emotionally honest sentence my husband had spoken to me in years. And somehow, hearing his pain made me realize something unexpected. Maybe we were not strangers after all. Maybe we were simply two aging people who had forgotten how to reach each other after spending decades surviving life instead of sharing it. The next few weeks felt different. Not magically better, just more honest. There is a difference. At our age, people stop expecting fairy tales. You begin understanding that healing inside marriage happens quietly, slowly, sometimes painfully slowly. But once truth enters the room, silence changes. Robert started spending less time hiding in the garage. Not all at once, just little changes. One morning he asked if I wanted to go with him to the hardware store. That may sound small to younger people, but after years of emotional distance, even tiny invitations feel important. I almost said no out of habit. Instead, I grabbed my purse and followed him to the truck. The drive felt awkward at first. We had forgotten how to simply be together without children around. No discussing school schedules, no errands for the family, just us, two older people sitting side by side with decades of unspoken emotions between them. At a red light, Robert suddenly asked, "You still talk to Carol?" Carol Benson had been my closest friend for over 30 years. "Sometimes," I answered carefully. He nodded. "She always liked you." I looked over at him, surprised. "What does that mean?" His hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "She listened to you." Something inside me shifted when he said that, because beneath the awkward wording, I heard the real meaning. He knew he had not listened enough. Men like Robert rarely apologize directly. Regret came out sideways, in fragments, in unfinished sentences. That afternoon, we ate lunch at a small diner near the highway, the kind of old-fashioned place with cracked vinyl booths and too much coffee. A younger couple sat across the room, arguing quietly, while their little boy colored on a paper placemat. I watched them longer than I should have. The woman looked exhausted. The man looked distracted. Neither noticed the other anymore. I suddenly saw our younger selves sitting there, busy, tired, disconnected without realizing it. Robert noticed me staring. "What?" I smiled sadly. "Nothing." But later, while driving home, I quietly said something I had never admitted out loud before. I think I lost myself somewhere inside motherhood. Robert glanced toward me briefly. "What do you mean?" I stared out the truck window at passing trees. I spent so many years taking care of everyone else that I forgot who I was outside this family. The words surprised even me, because they were true. Women from my generation were praised for sacrifice. We learned how to disappear inside caregiving, and for a long time I believed that was enough, until the children left. Then suddenly I was standing inside a quiet house trying to remember who Linda Harper actually was. Not mom, not grandma, not wife, just me. That realization terrified me. A few days later, I decided to clean out the upstairs hallway closet. I found old school drawings, forgotten birthday cards, tiny shoes I could no longer believe once fit my children's feet. Then I found something unexpected, a small, folded note in Robert's handwriting. I sat down right there on the hallway floor before opening it. The paper was yellowed with age. It was from nearly 30 years earlier. "Linda, I know things are hard right now. I know I work too much. But I hope someday things slow down and we finally get time together again. Love, Robert." I read it 3 times. Then I cried harder than I had cried in years, because suddenly I understood something heartbreaking. We had both been waiting for someday. Someday when the kids were older. Someday when money was easier. Someday when work slowed down. Someday when stress disappeared. But life keeps moving while couples wait for someday. And before you realize it, you wake up 69 years old, sleeping beside someone you once deeply loved, but barely know emotionally anymore. That night, I showed Robert the note during dinner. He looked embarrassed immediately. "I forgot about that." "I didn't," I whispered. He stared at the paper for a long moment. I meant it. I believed him. That was the strange thing. Despite all our emotional distance, I never doubted Robert loved me in the only way he knew how. The problem was not lack of love. It was lack of emotional presence, and those are not the same thing. Later that evening, we sat on the back porch watching the sunset, something we had not done together in years. The air smelled like fresh grass after rain. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Robert quietly said, "I think I spent most of my life believing providing was enough." I turned toward him slowly. His eyes stayed fixed on the yard. "My dad worked all the time too," he continued. "That's what I thought husbands were supposed to do. His voice sounded tired, almost ashamed. I felt unexpected compassion rise inside me, because generational pain travels quietly through families. Men taught not to express emotion become husbands who struggle with intimacy. Women taught to suppress their needs become wives who slowly disappear emotionally. And both people end up lonely while sitting inches apart. I should have said something sooner too, I admitted softly. Robert looked at me then. You tried. I laughed sadly. No, I hinted. I stayed hurt quietly. I expected you to read my mind. That honesty mattered, because marriages rarely break from one person alone. Distance grows slowly through years of missed conversations, buried resentment, exhaustion, pride, and silence. The sunset faded while we sat together, talking more openly than we had in decades. Not perfectly, awkwardly sometimes, but honestly. Then Robert suddenly asked something that caught me completely off guard. Are you unhappy you stayed with me? The question hurt, not because I had an answer, because I realized he had probably wondered that silently for years. I reached for his hand carefully. Old hands, wrinkled hands, hands that built a life together even when emotional connection struggled to survive. No, I whispered honestly, but I think I was lonely for a long time. He nodded slowly like he already knew. For a while, we sat quietly again. Then he said something I will never forget. I was lonely too, Linda. I looked at him in complete surprise. Men rarely admit loneliness out loud, especially older men, especially men like Robert. His eyes stayed fixed ahead as he continued speaking softly. I just didn't know how to say it. And suddenly, after 45 years of marriage, I realized something painful and beautiful at the same time. We had both been starving emotionally while pretending everything was fine for decades. A week later, Robert asked me to take a drive with him. No explanation, just, get your sweater, I want to show you something. It was early evening. The sky was turning soft orange as we drove through back roads outside town. For most of our marriage, Robert was never a man who planned emotional moments, so I felt nervous, curious too. Finally, he pulled the truck beside a small lake about 30 minutes from home. We used to come here, I said quietly. He nodded. The place looked smaller now. Funny how places shrink when you grow older. We sat on a wooden bench near the water while ducks moved slowly across the surface. For a long time, neither of us spoke. But this silence felt different from the old silence. Not empty, peaceful. There is a huge difference. Robert cleared his throat awkwardly. I used to come here after work sometimes. I looked at him, surprised. When? Years ago. Why? He stared toward the lake. Sometimes I didn't know how to come home. That sentence broke my heart, because I suddenly understood something I had missed for decades. I thought Robert's silence meant he did not feel deeply, but maybe silence was simply the only way he knew how to survive his feelings. Older men were often raised emotionally alone. No language for sadness, no space for fear, no permission for vulnerability. So emotions stayed trapped inside them until silence became their entire personality. I wish you'd told me that, I whispered. He nodded slowly. Me too. The wind moved gently across the lake while evening settled around us. Then Robert said something unexpected. You know what scared me after Emily left? What? He looked down at his hands before answering. I thought you were going to realize you deserved better than me. Tears instantly filled my eyes. 45 years together, and underneath all that emotional distance, my husband had been carrying fear too. Fear of not being enough. Fear of failing me emotionally. Fear I would finally stop accepting the life we built. I moved closer beside him on the bench. You were never the villain in my story, Robert. He looked at me carefully. Then what was I? I thought about that question for a long moment. Finally, I answered honestly. A man who loved me the best way he knew how. His eyes lowered immediately. But it wasn't always the way you needed, I added gently. He nodded once. No. There it was, the truth. Not cruel, not dramatic, just honest. And honestly can heal things silence destroys. On the drive home, Robert reached over and rested his hand lightly on mine. Such a small gesture, but after years of emotional distance, it felt enormous. I realized then that marriage after children leave is not simply about rediscovering your spouse. It is about rediscovering yourself, too. For the first time in years, I started doing small things only for me. I joined a local book club. I started walking every morning again. I called old friends more often. Not because I wanted distance from my marriage, because I finally understood something important. No relationship can carry the full weight of your identity, not even a long marriage, especially after children grow up. One afternoon, Emily called again. This time she sounded lighter somehow. "How are things?" she asked carefully. I smiled while looking toward the backyard where Robert was trimming hedges. "Different," I said. "Good different?" I watched Robert stop suddenly to wave at me through the window like a shy teenage boy. I laughed softly, maybe for the first time in years. "Yes," I whispered. "Good different." That night, Robert and I cooked dinner together. Nothing fancy, just soup and grilled sandwiches. But we talked while cooking. Real conversation. Small conversation sometimes. Awkward conversation too. But alive. More human. At 69, I learned that marriage after children leave is not the ending people fear. It is a mirror. It shows you exactly what was hidden beneath the noise all along. And if you are lucky, if both people are willing, it can also become a second chance to finally see each other clearly again.